every major airline on Earth is obsessed with efficiency. They track fuel burned down to the gallon. They optimize flight paths to save minutes. They retire aircraft the moment they stop making financial sense. And yet, right now, there are planes flying across America and around the world that seem to make absolutely no sense at all. Aircraft that burn more fuel than their modern replacements. Jets that require extra crew or special approvals. Planes that passengers actively avoid. So why are they still in the air? The answer isn't what you think, and understanding it reveals something fundamental about how aviation actually works. We've been taught to believe that airlines are ruthlessly logical machines. Every decision driven by spreadsheets. Every aircraft chosen for maximum profit. The narrative is simple. Old planes get replaced by newer, more efficient ones, and anything that doesn't fit that model disappears. It's a clean story. It's also incomplete because when you look closer at the actual fleets flying today, you start noticing planes that shouldn't be there. Aircraft that violate every rule of modern efficiency. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize that aviation doesn't follow the logic we assume it does. If you're someone who wants to understand the real reasons behind aviation decisions, the hidden factors that shape what you see at the airport, then you're in the right place. This channel exists to explore those layers. Consider subscribing if that interests you, and if you enjoy this kind of long-form explanation, a like helps more people discover it. Let's start with what seems obvious. Airlines hate wasting money. Fuel is often their second largest expense after labor. A single percentage point of fuel efficiency across a fleet can mean tens of millions of dollars annually. So when a manufacturer releases a new aircraft that burns 15 or 20% less fuel than the plane it replaces, the math seems simple. Buy the new plane. Retire the old one. Profit. Except that's not what happens. Not always. Not even most of the time. Because aircraft economics aren't actually about fuel efficiency in isolation. They're about total operational cost across the entire life of the airplane. And that calculation is vastly more complex than most people realize. Take the Boeing 767. It's been out of production for over a decade. It burns more fuel per seat than a 787 or an Airbus A330neo. And yet, Delta, United, and other carriers still operate dozens of them, not because they're sentimental, not because they forgot to retire them, but because in certain missions, on certain routes, with certain operational realities, the 767 still makes more financial sense than its replacements. How is that possible? Start with the acquisition cost. A used 767 might cost $20 million. A new 787 costs over $200 million. Even if the 787 saves $2 million a year in fuel, it takes decades to break even, and by then, the airframe might be approaching its own retirement. The 767, despite being older, still has years of viable service life, especially with proper maintenance. Airlines don't just compare fuel burn, they compare total cost of ownership, and sometimes the older plane wins, but it goes deeper than purchase price. Consider pilot training. Every aircraft type requires its own certification. Moving a pilot from a 767 to a 787 means weeks of simulator time, ground school, check rides, and regulatory approval. That process costs the airline roughly $50,000 per pilot. If you operate 5767s, replacing them all means retraining potentially hundreds of pilots. Even if you plan to do it gradually, you're now running two fleets, which brings us to the next hidden cost: fleet commonality. Airlines don't just buy planes. They build ecosystems around them, spare parts inventories, maintenance tooling, technician training programs, ground support equipment. When you operate a single aircraft type, you can stock parts efficiently, rotate crews seamlessly, and troubleshoot problems faster. When you operate multiple types, every one of those advantages erodes. You need more parts sitting in more warehouses. You need separate maintenance bays. You need schedulers who can manage different crew qualifications. The complexity explodes. So even if a new aircraft is technically superior, introducing it means accepting years of transitional inefficiency. This is where things get interesting. Some of the planes that look most illogical are actually the result of highly rational decisions made under constraints invisible to outsiders. Consider regional jets. The Bombardier CRJ-200, for instance. It's small, it's loud, passengers don't love it, and it's less efficient per seat than larger aircraft. So why do American, Delta, and United still contract with regional carriers that fly them? because scope clauses in pilot union contracts limit the size and number of large regional jets mainline carriers can use, because smaller cities can't fill larger planes consistently, because having a 50-seat jet on a route is often better than having no service at all, and the economics of that route don't support anything bigger. The CRJ-200 exists not because it's ideal, but because it's the best solution within a web of constraints that include labor agreements, market demand, and infrastructure limitations. Or think about airport constraints. Not every airport can handle every aircraft. Some runways are too short for larger jets. Some gates lack the ground power or jetway configurations for newer wide bodies. Some airports have noise restrictions that favor certain engine types. An airline might keep an older, smaller aircraft specifically because it's the only thing that can operate profitably into a particular airport. LaGuardia, for instance, has runway length restrictions that matter. Certain mountain airports have performance requirements that limit aircraft choice. Choosing the wrong plane might be the only way to serve the route at all. Have you ever noticed a particular type of plane that seemed out of place on a route you fly regularly? Maybe something older than you expected, or smaller, or configured differently than the airline's usual fleet. There's probably a reason, and it might be more interesting than you think. Feel free to share which aircraft you've wondered about in the comments. It's one of those details that once you start noticing, you see everywhere. Now let's talk about certification and regulatory reality. People assume that if a better plane exists, airlines just switch to it. But aviation doesn't work that way. Every aircraft must be certified by the FAA for specific operations. Extended range twin engine operations, known as ETOPS, allow certain twin engine jets to fly long routes over water, far from diversion airports. But that certification isn't automatic. It requires proving reliability over thousands of hours. It requires specific maintenance programs. It requires airline operational history with that exact aircraft type. If you want to replace an older 4-engine widebody with a newer, more efficient twin, you can't just do it overnight. You need ETOPS certification, which might take years to achieve for a new type in your fleet. During that time, the older plane keeps flying, not because it's better, but because it's certified for missions the newer plane isn't approved for yet. And then there's residual value and market timing. Aircraft are long-term assets. Airlines plan around depreciation, financing terms, and resale value. Sometimes keeping an older plane makes sense simply because the market for selling it is terrible at that moment, while the cost of replacing it is unusually high. Aircraft orders are placed years in advance. Delivery slots are limited. If you want to retire a fleet of older planes but can't get enough replacements delivered for 3 more years, you're stuck operating what you have. The alternative is shrinking your network, canceling routes, and losing market share. That's not illogical. That's reality. Maintenance infrastructure also plays a bigger role than most realize. Airlines build entire facilities around specific aircraft types. They train mechanics. They establish vendor relationships. They accumulate institutional knowledge. When you've been maintaining 767s for 30 years, your mechanics know every quirk, every common fault, every shortcut that saves time. Introducing a brand new aircraft type means starting over. It means relying on manufacturer support while your own people learn the systems. It means more unexpected delays as you encounter problems you haven't seen before. Sometimes the devil you know really is better than the angel you don't, especially when your operational reliability depends on fixing planes fast. Let's zoom out for a moment. What we're really talking about here is the difference between theoretical efficiency and operational efficiency. In theory, the newest aircraft is always best. In practice, the best aircraft is the one that fits your network, your infrastructure, your crew base, your financing options, your regulatory environment, and your strategic timeline. Aviation is a system. Every piece connects. Changing one piece ripples through everything else. An airline isn't just choosing a plane, it's choosing a decade-long operational commitment that touches every part of the business. Consider Boeing's decision to keep updating the 737 instead of designing an all-new aircraft. Many criticized that choice. The 737 MAX had a troubled entry into service, and some argued Boeing should have started fresh. But from Boeing's perspective, and from the perspective of airlines that operate hundreds of 737s, commonality was invaluable. Pilots could transition with minimal training, maintenance programs could evolve rather than restart, the entire ecosystem could continue. That's not laziness, that's recognizing that change change has costs, and sometimes continuity delivers more value than revolution. The strategy had flaws, obviously, but the logic behind it wasn't irrational. Here's something most people don't consider. Sometimes airlines keep planes specifically because passengers don't care as much as we think they do. Yes, some aviation enthusiasts know the difference between an Airbus A320 and a Boeing 737. Yes, some frequent flyers have preferences, but the vast majority of passengers book based on price, schedule, and frequent flyer program. They don't know what aircraft they're flying until they board, and even then, most don't care. As long as the plane is safe and gets them there on time, the specific type is irrelevant. That gives airlines flexibility. They can optimize for operational efficiency rather than passenger perception. A plane that looks outdated to an enthusiast might be a perfectly rational choice for an airline that knows its customers won't notice or won't mind. Fuel efficiency matters, but it's not everything. An aircraft that burns 10% more fuel but costs 30% less to acquire and maintain might be the smarter choice, especially on shorter routes where fuel burn is less significant. An older plane that your mechanics can fix quickly might outperform a newer one that grounds for days waiting for specialized parts. The calculus isn't simple, and the answer changes depending on the route, the market, the competition, and the airline's specific situation. There's also the question of risk. Introducing a new aircraft type is a major operational risk. What if it has teething problems? What if the manufacturer underdelivers on promised performance? What if maintenance turns out to be more complex than expected? Airlines remember the Airbus A380, an advanced efficient aircraft that turned out to be too specialized for most networks and is now being retired early by several carriers. They remember the Boeing 787's entry into service challenges. They remember every time a new aircraft didn't live up to its promises. So sometimes sticking with the older proven plane is simply about risk management. It's less exciting, but it's safer. And let's not forget the secondary market. Older aircraft that no longer make sense for major US carriers often find second lives with cargo operators, charter companies, or airlines in other parts of the world where labor and operating costs are different. That residual value matters. It affects financing terms, depreciation schedules, and the total cost of ownership. An aircraft that's done for one airline might have another decade of useful life elsewhere, and knowing that affects when and how you retire it. What becomes clear when you examine all these factors is that the planes that seem illogical are usually logical within a specific context. The 767 that looks inefficient compared to a 787 makes perfect sense when you account for acquisition cost, pilot training, route networks, and operational flexibility. The regional jet that seems outdated makes perfect sense when you consider scope clauses, thin routes, and airport limitations. The older widebody that burns more fuel makes perfect sense when you factor in ETOPS certification timelines and market conditions. Aviation isn't about choosing the perfect plane. It's about choosing the best plane for right now within the constraints that actually exist. This is what Hidden Aviation explores. The decisions that look strange until you understand the full picture. The logic that's hidden beneath the surface. Aviation is a world where compromises aren't failures. They're strategy, where efficiency isn't just about fuel burn. It's about total system optimization, where the wrong plane is often exactly right for reasons most people never consider. There are many more decisions like this throughout the industry. Aircraft that shouldn't exist but do. Routes that shouldn't be profitable but are. Strategies that look backwards but point forward. Each one tells a story about how aviation really works, and understanding them changes how you see every flight you take.